This is Eliyahu Shear from Chesed Ve'emet, www.lovingkindness.co. And today we're learning in a group shiur, a live group shiur on Skype. We're studying Tanya, and later on we're going to be studying Derech Hashem. At the moment, we're actually on our 5th lesson already. I'm very excited by that because it means that we're progressing, and we're on chapter 2. You'll see in front of you on the screen that we're using the version of Tanya, which is called Lessons in Tanya, and it is published and copyrighted by Cohort Publication Society, and I have permission to make use of it, so I'm making use of it. What you'll see over here is the Hebrew, and you'll see the English as well, with translation and explanation that we will be going through in addition to the discussion that we're having, which means that you can follow along as we go, and of course all questions are welcome, and you can feel free in the shiur to contribute either something that you have to say or a question, or alternatively, of course, to be in touch with me directly and send me an email. I would be happy to discuss any issues or any discussion questions that you might have on the Tanya or later on through the book Derech Hashem. So here we are. We're on the Tanya. We're on chapter 2. We're moving ahead. Chapter 1 dealt with the 3 levels of souls in the Jewish people that we talk about as the soul of the Tzadik, the soul of the Rasha, and the soul of the Beinoni, somebody who is a very good person in the sense of that their soul is very refined and they are completely connected with God. And then there's the Rasha, whose soul is, let's just say, not quite as refined, and he finds himself distracted from fulfilling what he really should do in this world. And then we find the Beinoni, who is somebody not really who's in between, but somebody who is actually on the level kind of like the Tzadik, only the fact is that he still has a Yetzer Hara, he still has an evil inclination that pulls him down and brings up, stirs up a type of a desire in him that he should go out and commit an Aveira. But the truth of the matter is that this Yetzer Hara doesn't really express itself. It doesn't express itself in thought, speech, and action, because the person is so occupied already with Torah study and he's so occupied with mitzvah observance that it doesn't manifest itself in action. And this is the difference really between the Beinoni and the Tzadik, that the Tzadik has completely eliminated the Yetzer Hara within him. He has no evil inclination. And chapter 1 ended off with this concept of the animal soul that we spoke about, that there are 2 souls within a person. One is called the godly soul, the other is called the animalistic soul. And the animalistic soul comes from this concept of what's called klipa noga, which means the translucent or the bright klipa. Klipa means shell, and the shell is something that conceals a fruit, a peel conceals the fruit inside, the nut, or the fruit, or the fruit, the peel. And the purpose is in order to protect the fruit or protecting the nut. It's not in itself really something that's bad, but the truth is that we don't want the klipa. So we have to remove the klipa in order to access the fruit that is inside. Now, chapter 2 takes us onto this journey where we move ahead from discussing the animalistic soul and we move ahead to discussing the godly soul. So we start immediately, and it says as follows: Nefesh Hashenit beYisrael, the second soul that every Jewish person has, Chelek Eloka mimamal Mamash. It is a portion of God from above in reality. This very beautiful sentence that the Alter Rebbe is teaching us over here. The second soul is a portion of God. And that's, for example, if you were to take something like, let's just give a materialistic thing. And of course, this is not to be used as an example. It's completely separated from the concept of spirituality. But let's just take a person who wants a cake, and he cuts the cake into various pieces and he eats a piece of the cake. We say that each piece of the cake, let's say, is actually just a portion of the bigger cake, and the cake itself should taste the same. Every part of the cake should be the same in general. It's a chocolate cake. So when we cut the cake into slices, we find that each slice is basically the same. And each portion is just a section of the bigger cake. So basically, if we were to turn that now to spirituality and ignore the example I've given, because it is irrelevant when we speak about spiritual things, but I only gave it in order to understand a concept as a metaphor, which is certainly way removed from the concept of God. But the concept is as follows: every Jewish soul, the godly soul within a Jew, is a portion of God from above, which means if we were, so to speak, take a section of God in spirituality and cut it off and put it into a body, we would find that this is, in fact, what the Jewish soul is all about. He says also over here, he uses the word mamash. In Hebrew, the word mamash comes from the word lemashmesh, which really means to feel something. If you want to feel something, it has mamash. You can feel it. It has something to it. It has substance to it. So therefore, the second part of the Jewish soul is truly a part of God above. Truly being the key word related to the word mamash, that you can really experience it. Which means if you put that soul into physicality, what you see in the physical is actually the portion of God manifesting itself in the human body. A part of God above is a quotation from scripture. In the book of Eov 31:2, the Alter Rebbe adds the word truly, which really is mamash, coming from the word like physicality, that you can feel it, to stress the literal meaning of these words. For as is known, some verses employ hyperbolic language. For example, the verse describing great and fortified cities reaching into the heavens is clearly meant to be taken figuratively, not literally. In order that we should not interpret the phrase a part of God above in a similar manner, the Alter Rebbe adds the word truly, thus emphasizing that the Jewish soul is quite literally a part of God above. Don't be confused. When we speak about this soul in the human body, we're speaking about it as it exists in reality. It is not a hyperbole in any way whatsoever. K'moshe Kasuv, as the pasuk says, as the verse says, Vayipach ba'apav nishmas chayim, and God blew into his soul, he blew into his nostrils a soul of life, or a living soul. It says in the verse over there that when Adam was created, it says concerning Adam, whose soul was a comprehensive one, and the Neshamah klalit, in that it contained all the particular souls of subsequent generations, and he, God, blew into his nostrils a soul of life, which means to say that the breath of God that existed within his innards, so to speak, the innards of God, this is what came out. And we described this in our previous shiur, which I just go through very briefly again, as the Zohar describes. The Zohar describes the concept of a glass blower who is about to blow air into a tube, which will enter into a vessel, which will be created into the shape of a glass. And basically what happens up here, as you can imagine, that there is the air that is in the very lungs of the glass blower, and the air goes out through the mouth. It goes through the tube of the glass that he's going to blow into, and then it rests inside the glass container, which he then shapes in a certain way. Now, the area of the soul that enters to the glass itself and rests there is called the Nefesh. The area of the soul that moves through the tube as it enters into this glass vessel is called the Ruach, which is the wind aspect. It's moving. There's some sort of a movement there. And then lastly, we have this actual air itself as it exists within the mouth of the blower, and this is called the Neshamah. And that Neshamah is ultimately coming from the air in the lungs, which is ultimately coming from the desire of the one who is blowing and wants this air to come out and manifest itself in the vessel. So too, this is how God creates a human, how he puts the soul into the physical body by means of the breath that comes out of him and enters into the vessel. Once it enters into the vessel, it takes on its own life, but the reality is that it is the very same soul that is in that vessel that once existed within the reality of the essence of God himself. And as the verse says, we say in the prayer concerning the soul of every individual Jew, you blew it into me. You blew it. What does it mean? You blew. The significance of the verb to blow as it relates to the infusion of the Jewish soul is now explained. The Zohar says, Man de nafach mituchei nafach, which means somebody who blows from his very innards. Pirush, mitochiyuto umipinyoso. He blows out through his very innards and his inside. When a person blows, as opposed to a person speaking, or as a person just simply breathing, where air just exists in a certain stable state, there's no real force, there's no real movement. But once a person blows, Blowing speaks about the concept of coming from the very bottom of a person's lungs, and it comes out with force. That the very innerness of the life force of a person that he gives outwards as he blows out with force, with strength. Blowing tires a person much more quickly than speaking, as is readily observed, for it requires a greater exertion of effort and vitality. Hence the fact that the metaphor of blowing is used to describe God's implanting the Jew's soul in the body signifies that his soul originates in the innermost aspect of godliness. These are amazing words. We just need to think about this just for a few minutes. We need to just meditate on this concept. Anybody who's looking for a meditation, just to close one's eyes and to think, who am I really? Am I something that is something that's bad? Am I something that's wrong in existence? Perhaps I did certain things in my life that are not appropriate, and one begins to think certain thoughts that might seem to be negative. But the truth of the matter is, a person has to sit down, he has to close his eyes, and he has to think of himself as that his godly energy inside him, the soul, is actually a portion of God. We're not joking, we're not playing around here, but the essence inside him is a portion of God. That the Jew is rooted in God's innermost and essential being is indicated further by the designation of the Jewish people as God's children, whose souls originate in his thoughts, just as a child stems from his father's brain, as the Alter Rebbe explains presently. So what we're going to see over here is that just as it is that a human being, a physical child that comes into this world, actually stems from the father's brain, so too is the spiritual child, which means the soul, and the Jew, as it comes into this world, actually comes from the father's brain, father with a capital F, as the Alter Rebbe explains. Kachal derech mashal, nishmas Yisrael alu b'machshava. And so this is an example. This is how the souls of the Jewish people arose in thought. What does it mean that they arose in thought? The Jew has his source in divine thought, the innermost level of godliness. All other created beings, even angels, are rooted in and created by divine speech. Speech is external in comparison with thought. Again, the Alter Rebbe's purpose in writing the Tanya is to describe to the Jew the nature of his soul. He is not really discussing the nature of all souls in the world and how they interact and how God came to create all of existence, and that there was a breakage of vessels, and this brought about all creatures in the world, and so on and so forth, and how they exist. The purpose of the Tanya was to concentrate on the nature of the Jewish soul. How do we understand a Jewish soul, and how do we interact with it, and how do we relate to it, and how do we become ourselves? He's speaking exclusively to the Jew at this point in time. Kidiksiv, as the verse says,
just to ask you, I noticed that the translation here, there's no designation in the translation between Neshamah and Nefesh. They're both translated as soul.
Correct. In other words, according
would
to
it help in the translation, because they both function differently, in a translation to somehow distinguish between the two?
Okay, in this particular instance, Kachal derech mashal nishmas Yisrael. Here he's speaking about the Neshamah, which is the third level of the soul, as we've discussed before, which the Nefesh being the lower level. Let's just see, where did we speak about the Nefesh? Where did we speak about the Nefesh? Nishmas, again, Neshamah. Above we said the Nefesh Hashanit. We said the second Nefesh, which is the lowest level. And then afterwards he speaks about the Neshamah, that he's blowing into him the Neshamah. I'm wondering, your question is very valid. I'm wondering if the Alter Rebbe wanted to specifically speak about the two different sides of the soul. Here in the one instance, he speaks about a lower level soul, which even that is a chelek Elokai mima Mamash. And then afterwards he comes and he says, but when he blows it in, he ultimately blows it in on the level of Neshamah. What does he really want to say in terms of the two levels? I don't see any commentary over here that has made a distinction. I think the question is a very valid one, because on the one hand, we're speaking about Nefesh, which is the lowliest part. And then on the other hand, immediately he launches in and he expresses himself as relating to the Neshamah, which is blown into him.
Yeah, because I'm playing around with this idea in my translation to Mahava Yabok. The question becomes, how do you distinguish between them when you're translating into English? Is it easy?
Right.
Should you simply say everyone is a soul, but it certainly is not.
Correct.
They have differences.
Correct. And I think that it's important that, first of all, we don't actually have in English an adequate translation. There is none.
Maybe just leave it in the Hebrew then.
Only in the Hebrew. Only in the Hebrew.
I'm saying maybe in the translation, simply put it in the Hebrew. See, Neshamah, don't translate it then. Maybe.
You're 100% correct. You can say that 100%. You can say, when you're speaking about Nefesh, say Nefesh. And then at the back of the book, or wherever you want to refer the reader to explain what you're saying, you say Nefesh is the lowest level of the soul. Neshamah is the third level of the soul, which has a difference in power. In terms of where it's related to in its soul power, there is a difference. Just like there is a difference in one's fingers, that you can call, a person can say he has 5 fingers on his hands. Well, he's correct. He does have 5 fingers, but he doesn't have 5 fingers. He has actually 5 different segments on his hands, which function as fingers in a different capacity. One cannot compare the capacity of the thumb to the baby finger or to the middle finger. Each finger represents something else. It's able to attend to a particular task in life that the other finger can't. And if it didn't need that purpose, we would have 5 fingers which all worked in exactly the same way. We have 5 extensions on our hands which were exactly the same size, but they're not. They're different. But still, relatively speaking, all we say is, how many fingers do you have on your hands? We don't say how many extensions or something like that. And then you say, oh, I've got the thumb, and I've got a ring finger, and I've got a baby finger. You don't really say that. You say, I've got 5 fingers. But if you want to describe an action, like you want to say, hold the glass in your hand, you say, put your thumb on the one side of the glass and put your 4 other fingers around the glass, and in that way you'll be able to hold the glass so that it won't fall out of your hands. We could say such a thing and describe that is how the thumb is functioning relative to the other 4 fingers. And likewise, if one is writing, one could say, take the pencil and place the pencil between your index finger and your thumb, or your third
finger, the separation,
and then use and describe. And that's the purpose of it. But when a person uses, let's say, his cell phone, for example, watch people, and when they scroll through things on their cell phone, you'll notice that for the most part, they'll scroll through with the second finger, for example. And when they click on something, it'll also be with the index finger. They won't use their thumb, generally speaking, to do it. That finger seems to work very nicely for that purpose, or even perhaps the third finger. But it's very rare you'll see somebody using their pinky finger in order to scroll on their cell phone. Nevertheless, if we were writing a book, we would say a person has 5 fingers. But if a person wants to be specific in a particular instance to describe the power of the fingers, he would have to say, here we use the thumb, here we use the index finger, here we use a middle finger, a ring finger, and the pinky finger. And this is the purpose it works for. Yeah. So I would say the same thing over here. If we're speaking in a general capacity of the power of the soul, we speak about a soul. In English, a soul. In Hebrew, the main word that's used is Neshamah. For most purposes, when we speak about a soul, we say, oh, he's got a beautiful Neshamah. You know? Right. That's how we express it. We don't say he has a beautiful Nefesh, or a beautiful Ruach, or a beautiful Chaya or Yechida. We say he has a beautiful Neshamah. So I think that we should, for the purpose of where we're at the moment, we're going to stick to using the simple meaning. When we say Neshamah, we refer to a general level of soul power, which is inside a person. We don't want to define it here as being Nefesh or Ruach or the power of the Neshamah, unless, of course, we can find somebody who has a lot more insight than I do, and they'll be able to explain to us, why did the Alter Rebbe use the word Neshamah in these instances? Was he being specific? Because he was specific. And why did he choose to use Nefesh above, whereas over here, clearly, he is using the other quotations using the word Neshamah? Okay, it's a valid question. Anyhow, we'll continue. So, Kakal Derech Mashal Nishmas Yisrael Alu B'Machshava. So, the Jewish soul rose in God's thought, as opposed to being created through speech. Like it says, Vayom Hashem Yehi such and such, Vayehi such and such. God says, let there be such and such, and there was such and such. He used the power of speech in order to create various things in creation. But when it came to the creation of the Jewish soul, there is no mention over there of him creating, as in the sense of Vayehi, let there be man type of thing. It's just that he's created through the power of he's created through the power of thought. God thinks, so to speak, and through his thought, he brings up the soul. He brings up this Jewish soul. Kidiksev, as it's written, B'ni Bechori Yisrael, my son, meaning the Jewish nation, is Israel is my firstborn son. Bani Bechori Yisrael. Yisrael is my firstborn son. Banim atem laHashem Elokeichem. You are children to Hashem your God. What does that mean exactly, to be a child? Well, we said before that the whole idea of a child coming to existence stems from the father's brain, the drop of seed, and that is how all blessing comes about. But everything begins at the start over here. There's a drop of seed that exists in the brain of the father. And when the physical act is performed in order to bring the seed down and ultimately fertilize an egg to create the child, but everything stems originally from the seed in the father's head. He's thinking in his mind about the concept of what child is. And through that thought process, the drop of semen is created, which ultimately then brings life to this egg and causes a soul to be drawn down and the physical body to be created. So it says, what does it mean to be a son? Perush, it means, explains, the son is actually drawn down from the brain of the father, his inner and essential being. That means the very innerness of the father is what ends up coming out and producing the child that will be born. So to speak, the same thing happens here. Nishmas kol ish Yisrael, the soul of every single Jewish person. Nimshecha mimakshavto v'chokhmaso yisbarach. It's drawn down from the thoughts and the wisdom of Hashem. The Alter Rebbe now takes this concept a step further. Deriving from God's thoughts and wisdom actually implies that it derives from God himself, as he goes on to explain. The Ihu Chachim v'lo b'chokhmah yediyah, that he, God, is wise, but his wisdom is something that is not knowable, which means to say that when we speak about God being wise, we don't mean to say in the concept that we speak about wisdom, but rather in the concept that something that exists within him that we don't understand. Eliyahu v'chokhmaso echad, but rather he and his wisdom are one. So the wisdom of God is a completely different concept to our wisdom. Rambam, and the Rambam writes over there that God is the knowledge and he is the one who knows. He is everything. He knows and comprehends through the knowledge, and he is that which is known. God is also the subject of knowledge and comprehension, as Maimonides concludes. This means that God's wisdom and comprehension are totally different from man's. In human comprehension, there are three separate and distinct components: the person's soul, the knower and possessor of knowledge; the power of intellect and comprehension, the knowledge by which the person knows; and C is the subject of the knowledge, the known, such as the law in the Mishnah or the discussion in the Gemara, which is apprehended and known. Concerning God's wisdom, however, Maimonides states, he is the knowledge, the knower, and the known. Everything about wisdom exists in God in one unit. God is the means of comprehension, the knowledge, and at the same time is he who understands, the knower, and is also that which is understood, the known. And this thing is not so easy for a person to understand so clearly, because we think of wisdom in the way we do, whereby I am a human being with a brain, and then wisdom is something that exists in a book, and then when I read the wisdom, I gain the knowledge and I add it to my brain. That is the concept of wisdom. God's wisdom, on the other hand, doesn't work that way. Kidiksiv, as it's written, if you investigate, can you find God? It's impossible to find God, even if you try to search out for him. Ukasiv, and it's written, that my thoughts are not your thoughts. God works differently to the way that we work. Since his wisdom is one with God himself, as has been shown, it follows that the Jewish soul, which stems from divine wisdom, as stated above, actually derives from God himself. Now that's the concept that he's saying over here. This soul of the Jew is actually a real part of God above, real existence manifest in a physical body. Many Jewish philosophers rejected Maimonides' description of God as the knower, the knowledge, and the known. In fact, they considered it erroneous to ascribe to God a description of any sort, even of the lofty level of intellect of which Maimonides writes, inasmuch as description implies limitation and God is inherently limitless. The Alter Rebbe therefore points out in this note that the Kabbalists agreed with Maimonides, with the qualification that his concept does not apply to God's essence, for his essence is truly infinite, even higher than the inscrutable level of knowledge that Maimonides refers to. Regarding his essence, those who disagree with Maimonides are correct in maintaining that God cannot be defined in terms of knowledge, since he transcends it infinitely. Only after God limits the infinite light of his essence through the process of Tzimtzum, progressive contractions, and thereby assumes the attribute of Chokhmah, only then can it be said of God that he is the knower, knowledge, and known. Hagar. So basically what we've got over here so far is that when we speak about the fact that the child comes about through the mind of the father, we're speaking about this idea that the father has within him this concept of Chokhmah, of wisdom, and wisdom is the drop of seed. And what's going to happen is the drop of seed is going to fuse with an egg, and the egg, or you can even go through it within the father's own body himself. But if we exclude the father's body for a second and we go to the mother's body for a moment, the mother's body is the concept of the Binah. So the man is the Chokhmah, which is the seed, which contains within it the potential of everything that is to be created, like a drop of DNA. It's just the DNA itself. But nothing really happens until the DNA meets up ultimately with the egg, and the fusion that comes about through this causes everything within the DNA to expand, open up, and cause a child to come into existence. But it begins with the Chokhmah, and within the father's brain is the Chokhmah, which is ultimately going to have within it the soul, which will bring into this world, into the physical body. Now, although we say we can't really compare God's wisdom to our wisdom, we're using an analogy to help us understand the concept on our level. It's a metaphor. We're trying to understand the concept of godliness through ourselves. And we use that as the basis that Chokhmah within God, that is from there, it's the Jewish soul comes about, and therefore we are a portion of God himself. Says the note, V'hodulu Chokhmah HaKabbalah, כמו שכתב בפרדס מהרמ"ק, וכתוב בפרדס מהרמ"ק, וגם לפי קבלת האריזל, יציבה מילתא. Now, the sages of the Kabbalah, as it's agree actually with what Rambam says, and this is brought down in the Pardes of the Ramak, Rav Moshe Cordovora, the great Kabbalist who lived from 1522 to 1570, who preceded the Ari in Kabbalah, and the essence of Kabbalah was actually based originally in his teachings. Only afterwards the Ari came about and he taught additional things like the Partsufim, which the Ramak hadn't spoken about. But the sages of the wisdom, the sages of the Kabbalah, of the wisdom of the Kabbalah, they agreed with what the Rambam said, and even also according to the teachings of the Ari, that this is the principle. Even according to Kabbalah of the Arizal, Maimonides' statement stands. The Kabbalah of the Arizal provides an even deeper insight into the limitless of God's essence, higher than even the level of knowledge to which Maimonides refers. Still, even according to the teachings of the Arizal, Maimonides' statement is acceptable, with one proviso, however, and here's the rule. When we want to conceive of God, we must be careful because he is different to who we are. So the comparison is not a good one. So why are we using the comparison? We can only use it under one condition. And the condition is Besod hitlabshut or Ein Sof Baruch Hu. It's in the secret of the covering of the garments of the Or Ein Sof al yedei tzimtzumim rabim, through means of numerous contractions. B'kelim de Chabad Atzilut, into the vessels of Chabad of Atzilut. Now what he's teaching us are some Kabbalistic concepts. For those not familiar with all the Kabbalistic concepts, they don't have to worry about the technicalities. But very briefly, I'll say it as follows. Basically, imagine that there's this complete light that exists in all existence. And then at some point in time, God wants to create the world. And when he wants to create the world, he constricts himself from a certain section of creation, so to speak. None of this really exists in reality. Everything I'm saying over at the moment is completely irrelevant to reality, to physicality, to God being physical. Please, nobody should think any of these thoughts, but rather we're using these simply as a metaphors to describe, so to speak, what God is doing to himself, so to speak, so that we can grasp him. So we had the light, and afterwards God constricts himself in a way where he makes an open space where he can allow creation to take place in. And then what he's going to do is he's going to bring his light into all of existence. And as he brings the light into existence, we're going to find that the light is going to have to pass through numerous contractions in order to be ultimately accepted by a physical world. And until that happens, all that's going to take place is smashing and breaking. The light is too big, and so on and so forth, until eventually we're going to get to a stage where the light is accessible. And it's going to start in a high world called the world of Atzilut. After the world of Atzilut is going to come a lower world called Bria, then will come a lower world called Yetzirah, and then will come Asiya and the physical world of Asiya. Now, when we start in the world of Atzilut, we're going to find over there that the lights and the vessels all fit into a very structured form. And the top part of this form, as the light enters into these vessels, is known as Chabad. And that's, of course, what we're speaking about here as the Chabad Hasidim. The Hasidim of Lubavitch are known as the Chabad Hasidim, because Chabad stands for Chokhmah, Binah, and Da'as, which means wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. And the short of it, to describe exactly what those sefirot are all about, is that, as we said before, the Chokhmah is the seed. Everything exists in potential, but there's nothing yet there. That's the Chokhmah. So you imagine, for example, if a person thinks about the idea of building a house, and in his mind, he can conceive of this idea of this house, and then he's thinking about how beautiful the house is going to be. But at this point in time, all he has in his mind is house. But at a later point in time, he begins to think about what the house is going to be. And he says to himself, the house is going to consist of 10 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms. It's going to have a tennis court. It's going to have a jacuzzi. He's thinking of all sorts of things that this house is going to have. This is the concept of the Binah, of understanding, where we take a concept and we begin to extract and broaden out what was inside the wisdom. And then ultimately we get to a level, once a person has got to the stage where he's actually expanded the idea, that he can attach himself to the idea itself. Once he attaches himself to the idea, he's completely united with it. It's a complete yichud. He's completely in oneness with this particular thing. This is known as da'as, which means knowledge. And the difference between the knowledge and understanding is that, as we say in the beginning of the Torah, where it says, "V'adam yada eschava ishto," that Adam knew his wife Eve. What does it mean that he knew her? It means that he became united with her. He became one with her. They were one and the same. There was no difference any longer. There was no concept of Chokhmah, who is the Adam, and there was no concept of Binah, the understanding, who is Chava. But now there was a deeper concept where the two had united and experienced and expressed themselves in a complete unity. And what really makes a wise person really wise is not that he has wisdom, in other words, that he has gained a lot of information, which is what Chokhmah is. Chokhmah is just having this information, just piles and piles and loads of information. You know, there was once a story, for example, of a great sage that passed away. And when they buried the sage, somebody got up and he did a eulogy and he said, "We have just buried a treasure of books." That was the comment that they made at the eulogy. What do they mean that they buried this treasure of books? It meant to say it wasn't such a praise, unfortunately, for the sage that was buried, because what they were saying is that all that's being buried is just a treasure of books, because all that this person had was just books. He was just filled with books. But there's more to life than just books. Now one has to take the books and one has to digest them. One has to be able to be intelligent enough to bring out and expand what those books are teaching in a real way. But then there's a deeper level. And the ultimate level is that it's not good enough just to become greater in the knowledge that you've gained, but to actually become one with it. Becoming one with the concept is far deeper than understanding a concept. So let's take an example. If I say that there is a mitzvah, and it's a good example, that's why I always use it, it's a mitzvah to give charity to a person who's poor. On the Chokhmah level, all that a person can think about is that he's got this mitzvah, so he gives the charity to the poor person. On a Binah level, he gets to understand a little bit about the concept. I'm a wealthy man, he's a poor man, or he is in need of income, not necessarily that he's poor, but he's in need of income. So I give him the income. You know, I understand life a bit deeper. There's a situation taking place here, and I can help, and he needs the help, so we help. But then there's a level of da'at. Once a person gets to the level of da'at, now we're talking about a real chacham, because the real chacham, meaning not the chacham of the chokhmah or the mavin of the binah, but the real chacham of wisdom, the person who really has wisdom, is a person who exists in the state of da'at, whereby all of a sudden he becomes so one with the concept that the poor person and the wealthy person are all the same to him. He's become so fused with the concept that he realizes that for existence to take place healthily, there has to be the give and take. And therefore, he becomes one with the very concept of the giving. He knows and experiences and he feels what the other person is feeling as he gives him the money and he helps him. This, of course, is the highest level. It is not sufficient just to gain knowledge and read lots of books and then have a photographic memory and be able to recite the books off by heart. And it is not even sufficient to get onto this level of Binah, of understanding, where we can extrapolate one thing from another. You know, the wise person, he knows 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if you leave him by himself, he'll still be able to continue counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Very nice. But the person of understanding can start to work out things. He says, but if you take 1 and 1, you get 2. And if you take 5 and you take 3 away from it, you get 2. And if this and that, he works things out one to the other. But the person with da'as cleaves to the very subject matter. He becomes united with it. He becomes one with it. He is the subject matter. And this, of course, is the highest level to attain. Anyhow, we went off topic a little bit. The main point that I wanted to bring out over here is that the Mekubalim, the Kabbalists, were agreeing with the Rambam in what the Rambam said. Everybody was agreeing. Nobody is disagreeing over here. But on one condition, we can only talk about God in the concept of Tzimtzumim Rabim B'Keilim de Chabad de Atzilut, which means to say we can only talk about God when we take the light and we constrict it and we contract it, and then we take that contracted light, we put it into vessels, and we put it into the vessels of the wisdom, understanding, and knowledge in this highest world of Atzilut. Once you take the concept of God and you put it into a metaphorical idea of contracting it into the concept of wisdom, then we can speak about God's wisdom. But in general, it's impossible to speak about God's wisdom because God's wisdom is above everything that we've been speaking about. It exists on a plane that is far higher and above what we're saying. Through a process of self-limitation called Tzimtzum, contraction, God manifests, or in Kabbalistic terminology, clothes his infinite essence, referred to by the Kabbalists as Ein Sof, the endless one, infinite one, in the Sefirot, which are his attributes. This manifestation occurs first in Atzilut, specifically in Chabad of Atzilut, meaning the highest world. It means it's a world of total goodness. The only way we can describe the world of Atzilut, there are these 4 levels of manifestation of God in existence. And God is beginning to manifest himself in this high world called Atzilut. And the only way that we can possibly think of Atzilut, if you want to make some sort of comparison, is imagine a world of absolute goodness. There is no evil, not the slightest drop of evil. Wherever you turn, it is good. For example, imagine that you're on the road and you're driving somewhere, and as you're driving, somebody wants to get in front of you. So you say, please, bevakasha, please come in front of me. And then you need to go in front of somebody else. He says, please come in front of me. And the robot turns red and everybody stops at the robot. Nobody dares to go through. And when the robot turns green, people are going through. If the robot turns orange, people know to really stop, come to a stop, and then it's going to turn red. They'll be able to stop altogether. And everybody is obeying the rules of the road. And now, of course, if somebody needs assistance, you can imagine in the world of Atzilut, so to speak, that immediately somebody comes over to him, doesn't ask him any questions, doesn't ponder, did you work hard enough? Did you get a degree? Did this happen? Did that happen? Why did this happen to you? Did you lose a parent? Did this happen to that? He asks him all sorts of questions. Instead, what should he do? Help the fellow. The fellow needs help. He gives him help. In the world of Atzilut, it's a world of complete goodness. But by the time the light of God's or Ein Sof comes through into the world of Asiyah, and it moves through all of these contractions, it reaches a point into this world of the physical Asiyah where there's an aspect of bad. In fact, there's more bad over here than there is good. And so that is why we see the bad. But everything begins in the world of Atzilut, in an aspect of total goodness. And everything of the essence of God is manifested to the beginning of things in the level of the Chabad, of wisdom, because of course in wisdom and understanding and knowledge, meaning cleaving to becoming oneness with everything, it exists on the level of total goodness over there.
2 things. One is actually when it says this manifestation occurs first in Atzilut, didn't we learn in Otzrot that actually the first is in Adam Kadmon before Atzilut?
Correct. So the Adam Kadmon, of course, is a world that, generally speaking, about we don't talk about it. In other words, we know it when we learn it in the Otzor Chaim, and we can learn it in the Eitz Chaim, and all is well and good. But the world is so above all of existence that there's no point in discussing it. How do we describe that? How do we describe that in a physical way? That there are certain things that don't bother describing, because if you're trying to describe them, it's so way above us that we leave it out, and instead we limit ourselves to a slightly lower level that we can conceive of at that point in time. So that is why you'll see in most books, in the world of Adam Kadmon, Ak, as it's known, or Aleph Kuf, is a world that is not really discussed, with the exception of that moment that existence begins. As soon as the existence begins, we only speak about Atzilut. We speak about four worlds: Atzilut, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. And we no longer speak about the world of Adam Kadmon, because it is so far above what we can conceive of. We just ignore it altogether. And that is why he's not even saying that. He says the light begins in Atzilut. That's where he begins manifestation. Thus, at the level of Atzilut, God can indeed be defined in Maimonides terms of Noah, knowledge, and known, i.e. intellect. But we don't speak about anything that applies to above Atzilut. Above the world of Atzilut, the unknowable God cannot be defined. Accordingly, in terms of the Kabbalistic scale, Maimonides had nothing to say about God except from the world of Atzilut and down. So once the Rambam is speaking about godliness, he has the right to do so. Nobody's arguing with him, because he's not speaking about godliness as it pertains to godliness. He's speaking about godliness as it pertains to godliness manifest from the world of Atzilut. So the Mukbalim are saying, yes, you can speak about God in that aspect, as long as we're talking in revelation terms, at least by the level of Atzilut. But higher than that, you can't speak about God in any way. You can't say that God is knowledge. You can't say that he is known. You can't say anything about God above the world of Atzilut. The only thing you can possibly say about God as a description, perhaps if you're lucky, you can say the words, God is. And your sentence just has to end there, because there's nothing more to speak about.
It's pure being.
It's pure existence of whatever it is. Whatever it is, it's ridiculous to think about. It just is. So, but when Rambam speaks about this idea, and he says that God is knowledge, and he's this, and he's this, he's not
that's
wrong.
Why, well, that's why when you said before about in Keter, yes. is that it's not that it's really just pure goodness, because goodness is a relative term to human existence. Yes. Because one thing that I might feel is good, another person might feel is evil. And therefore it bespeaks of dualities and distinctions between things. We put a valence on them, we put a positive or negative spin on them. So in Keter, really there's just pure everything, and nothing is good and nothing is bad. Everything is just is, correct?
Okay, so let's put in perspective again. We must remember, in terms of our comparison, it is good. Okay, that's number one, because without comparison, we can't speak about it. Otherwise, you just say it is. But we must point out that when we say it is, we mean it's good. But there's one stipulation that we must make over here. Whenever we speak about a world like Atzilut, we speak about what's called revealed, manifest, visible goods, which means that if you were to find yourself in the world of Atzilut, you wouldn't just say it is, whatever it is. You would only say it is if you didn't know that there was a world of Asiya. Then you would say it is. That because once you only know about that, you can't speak about anything else if you don't know the opposite. But relative to where we are, we can speak about the opposite. And the opposite is the following. Opposite is called bad. What does it mean bad? Bad is not bad either, because like you said, it's all relative. If a fellow goes for an operation at the doctor and he has a problem with something that needs attending to, and the doctor does a terrific job, and the fellow lives for another 30 or 40 years after the operation, the doctor did a fantastic job. He's not doing anything bad. But I can tell you, when this particular patient came out of the anesthetic, he was feeling groggy, he was feeling pain. He didn't feel comfortable. And he would say, oh, it's bad, it's bad. It's not bad. What it is, it's hurting. So what you're looking at here is what's called an aspect that is feeling to you as bad, but it's not actually bad. But then you can say, of course, everything is good.
Yeah.
However,
in our world of Asiya, it's a world of relativity, where things are relative. And then when you can overcome them, you move up the Sefirot. And so, for instance, if I were to be in pain, but I were to say, Gamzula Tova, this pain is a gift from God, and therefore I accept it. All of a sudden, the negative sense of the pain is taken away. And therefore you can deal with the pain in a little more positive way than you can if you were to see it as a bad thing.
Okay. Again, I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying. It's very nice what you're saying, but I can tell you from having operations myself, and anybody had an operation knows, when you come out of the operation, you're still in pain. Even if you say to yourself, I know it's good, you're still in pain. You're still experiencing something that's hurting you. When you're in the world of Atzilut, so when we speak about good, we mean there is no such a concept of pain, of bad. There is no such a concept, meaning not relative. It means absolutely exactly so, that it is absolute goodness to the fullest extent that anybody could imagine relative to the bad. But when you're in that world, there is no concept of evil. It doesn't exist. It's completely satisfying, happy, pain-free, radiant. It's impossible to describe. Only a person who is there can express what it is, and you can only express it relative to where you are. And that's what we said over here. The Mekubalim are also saying, we're not going to disagree with what the Rambam is saying. The Rambam is not saying something wrong, but only on one condition, that we bring it down into the physical world. Because if you try and talk like the Rambam in a spiritual concept, you made a big mistake. You've taken God and you've lowered him, and you've spoken about him as if he's a human being. He's not a human being. He doesn't have knowledge. He's not the knower, and he's not the known. He's neither of those things. He just simply is. But when we bring him into a world of contraction, then we can speak about him in this aspect also. And that's the theme. Okay, we're going to stop over here for today in terms of our Tanya learning. I thank you for joining me. And if you're watching this online now, it will be uploaded. So please visit my site, www.lovingkindness.co, and keep in touch. And please feel free to join our shiurim that we have, or be in touch if there's another shiur that you would like to have. And let's see if we can make another group, and or wishing you the best.